Talking about different watch bezels, construction of bezels, what bezels do, what is a bezel. Bezel on a watch is anything that goes around the crystal of the watch. It could be decorative. If it's fixed, it's a decorative bezel. If you look at brands like Rolex, you have smooth, you have fluted bezel, engine turn bezel, which has it's a serrated cut. You have diamond bezels. You have segmented bezels that are smooth and they have random stones placed around them. The first bezels, I believe, were designed by Rolex. They came up with the idea of just having indexes coming around the outside of the watch. It could demonstrate a 24-hour time zone. It could demonstrate anything you want to break it down to going around that dial. You have your hands and you have everything else moves around it, but if you want a second reference to how your hands are moving, that's where any kind of bezel came into play, and that was the reason they started applying bezels to watches, to give it a multi-function as watches started to evolve. So bezels can be pretty much anything. It's primarily, if it's fixed, it's a decorative part of the watch until we start having indices going around it. We could have a telemeter, we could have a pulse meter, we could have anything but those have to be fixed and non-rotating, because what you're doing is you're actually timing something using the second hand. Obviously, pulse meter, you're going to time somebody's pulse using it just by watching the second hand go, and it's a way to mark how many seconds goes. Start talking about rotating bezels, that's a whole different animal. We have single directional, we have bi-directional. Bi-directional bezels, by nature, turn both ways. And that's primarily a GMT bezel, where you want to set your 24-hour, you want to set your travel time back or forth, depending on if you're flying east, flying west. I just took a trip last week. That was 3-hour time difference. I used my GMT, moved it back 3 hours. I knew what time it was back home. And it's just a very quick way to know where you're at without changing your home time, or if you want to change the time, depending on how long you're going to be there, and know what the home time is just at a glance. Of course, we talk about bezels, we get into dive bezels. And that's why one of the pieces that I wore tonight, it has one of the best rotating bezels ever. It's a bi-directional bezel, which is not normally found on a dive watch, but it locks. It's a complete lock. You have to actually push a button and lock it. You could turn it anywhere you want. Why do you need a bezel on a dive watch? You have to time both the time you're down, and you also have to time your ascension coming back up for decompression. So that's why the indexes on the bezels are set at specific marks. Say you're going diving, you're going to go ahead and set it to the minute. You're going to go under the water. That bezel's not going to turn, your minute hand's going to move. And that way you can time how long you've been underwater. And it gives you a quick indication without having to reset your watch or think, did I go underwater at exactly 3 o'clock or did I go under at 3:05? Let's take a second and talk about different kind of bezel materials. If you have a fixed bezel, it could be anything from steel to precious metal. You could have a separate metal on a watch. You could have a steel case with a gold bezel. There's your two-tone watch. You can also have carbon fiber. Hublot uses a lot of carbon fiber on their bezels. A lot of different brands use ceramic. Ceramic on the bezels, again, Hublot is another one for that. You can put pretty much any kind of metal you want and make a bezel out of it, especially if it's just a decorative. When we start talking about function, that's when it gets a little more specific. If you have numerals, you want the numerals protected. Multiple ways to protect them. You can engrave into the metal, like on a Rolex Explorer 2. Or if you want the bezels to light up to be luminous, then you can actually have the luminous underneath it, like the original Rolex GMT did with a bakelite finish, and now they're doing it with more of a ceramic finish on top of it. Very, very durable, keeps it shine. One of the most common bezels there are is a tachymeter. Tachymeter will actually give you your speed, and it's used for marking speed. So if you look at it first, why does it go backwards? Well, the reason it goes backwards is because the faster you're going, the higher numbers are indicating your speed. So if you start and stop over a 1 mile period and it only goes 5 seconds, you're going about 400 miles an hour. But if it goes all the way around to 60, then you're going 60 miles an hour. And it's the way it breaks down over the travel of the bezel. So it's actually a countdown as your speed. The further your chronograph hand goes, then the slower the car is actually going. And it's used in racing, it was used in time trials, it's used in a lot of different things. It can be used for artillery just to time a distance. If you want to have some fun sometime and there's a lightning storm, wait for a flash of lightning and hit your chronograph, go ahead and stop it and you can tell how far away it is. and just how it's traveling. It's just, so there's multiple uses for bezels. That's just one of them. We have some bezels that are fixed, and if the bezel is fixed, that means obviously it doesn't rotate. You can have, on some of the vintage Omegas, they actually printed a tachymeter or a pulse meter on the crystal itself, again, because it doesn't rotate. So the crystal itself is actually the index and is the decorative part or the informative part of what you're reading. And we start getting into the dive watches that they actually make a sound when you turn them. And the reason the way it's doing it is you have a fixed index, and it's actually locking a detent either way it turns. If it's a single directional, it has a little spring that grabs everything and it clicks along, but it won't allow it to click back the opposite way. If it's a GMT, then they just remove the little points and it can just slide both ways. We start getting the more advanced bezels. We have to talk about Breitling. Breitling de Montbrillans, they actually have a calculator built into the bezel, and it used to be a lot of fun. I used to wear one all the time, and my favorite thing to do with that was actually use it for a tip calculator. You know, so you go out to dinner and everyone's trying to figure out the tips and everything. You just look at your watch, you say what your tip wanted to be, you look at how much it was, and bam, there's your tip. You know, and it was just one of those really cool things to figure out real quick. And while everyone else is pulling out their cell phones to figure out, you know, the right tip to leave, you can do it. You know, it was one of those fun things. But there's so much information you can draw from that too, because you actually have a calculator that's on your wrist, the slide rule. And as long as you know how to use that, with Breitling, they actually give you a large version of it, so you can actually play with it and actually figure out how to use it, so when you're wearing your watch you can use it too. So that's one of the more informative bezel constructions and bezel applications. You could also have internal rotating bezels. What an internal rotating bezel means is it's attached to the dial itself, or it's on the outside rim of the dial, and it'll adjust either with the crown or a separate pusher. Jura Perigo, they use it for time zones. So you can change time zones and actually see where you are. A lot of brands use it. Patek uses it in the world times. As you change the GMT or the world time, it'll tell you what city you're in. And so you actually set your index to what city you're in, and it'll change your second time zone to that. So it keeps that reference from where you're flying, so you can use your home time zone or your second time zone. And on the travel time watches, you know, anything like that has an internal rotating bezel where you see that. We talk about manufacturing of bezels. If we stick to Rolex, where they have the bezel is actually a function of the case itself that holds the crystal. It's a single piece of metal. It's not fused anywhere. It can't be fused because it's under so much pressure as it presses down and holds that crystal on and locks that crystal in place. If there was if the watch was actually segmented, it would actually it could possibly crack. So it's actually made out of one piece of metal, and that's how you get the most strength out of it. Blancpain has some of the prettiest bezels there are. They're oversized to the watch. They're very legible. They have a sapphire cover over the top. They just jump out at the watch. They're just so pretty. They're one of my favorite bezels. I don't personally own one and hope someday I will. Of course, I have my favorite watches. I have my favorite types of bezels. I wear chronographs with rotating bezels. I wear chronographs with fixed bezels. I have a few dive watches that I love. And again, one of the reasons I wore this watch today is because this has one of my favorite bezels. It's so legible. It's so big. It has a positive lock. This little red button here is actually the lock for the bezel. So it's actually pretty cool. And a plop off. And this is one of my favorite pieces right here. I have GMTs, and there's so many different ways, depending on the application. When I'm traveling, I wear a GMT. If I'm taking a drive somewhere, I wear a chronograph. If I'm in the water, I wear a dive watch. So it depends on what I'm doing, and that's why I have the watches that I have, and that's why I personally like the watches that I have. I get them for purpose, and I get them because I like them. And that's my personal take on bezels. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Hope you'll reach out to me, any questions, and also leave questions and comments on this video, and I'll try to do my best to answer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe for more content like this.